If you were to compare the Sligo senior hurling team with a body that had nothing to do with hurling, I think the best fit you'd find would be a US Navy nuclear submarine. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You have a captain and a team. It's much the same. David Marquet was 17 years in the US Navy when he got his dream job. He got a command of a nuclear submarine, USS Olympia. Now, in the American Navy, they don't just rock up and give you the keys to a submarine. You have to do a theory test. And he studied Olympia for 12 months. He knew it from stem to stern. He knew every bolt, every nut in it. He knew how the instruments worked. He knew everything about the nuclear reactor and the turbines, the whole shebang. He knew it. He knew about the crew. He had their records. He felt when he went to Pearl Harbor to pick up his submarine that it'd be like stepping into his own house. He knew it so well, in theory anyway. But like a hurling captain, things always don't go according to plan. You know, it'd be like expecting to play in Markfish Park and having to play in the Centre of Excellence, for instance. That had never happened, but think if it did. Or someone being sent off, or a bad referee indecision, penalty missed, player not available through injury. Lots of things. So something like that happened to David. He rocked up to Pearl Harbor to collect the Olympia, and he was told by his superiors that they had good news and bad news for him. The good news was he was still going to be captain of a nuclear submarine. The bad news was it was the Santa Fe, not the Olympia. Because the captain of the Santa Fe had 12 months to go, but he decided he had enough. He threw his cap in over the reception desk and walked back into civilian life and opened a pub in Pearl Harbor called Shoot the Crows. So there was no one to captain the Santa Fe. David had to do that. So there he was. He was left, after all his study, he was left with a newer generation submarine he had no clue about. And there was another little problem. The team on the Santa Fe, the sailors, were the worst performing in all of the US Navy by any measurement that was ever done, and they are measured and recorded frequently. So, listen, he got what he wanted. He was a commander of a nuclear submarine. He took it. He headed out to sea. He said he'd put them into shape. And like he looked well in his white suit, big cap, shining, good shave in it. So David goes out to sea, and they do this little drill with nuclear submarines where they shut down the nuclear reactor and the turbines stop turbining, and you're on battery power alone. So they were just about moving with the battery power. And the idea was the crew get the nuclear reactor up and running again. It's kind of simulate an accident at sea or something goes wrong at sea. So it's a very useful drill because all the crew are involved in it. And David said to himself, well, he said, self, we might make this a little bit more interesting. And he said, and he even had a conversation with the navigator, an officer. And yeah, he says, that's what we'll do. We'll go to 2/3 ahead. They were travelling along at 1/3 ahead. He says, we'll go 2/3 ahead. So everyone will know that the batteries are draining that little bit quicker, and they need to get the nuclear reactor up and running that little bit quicker. It puts a bit more pressure on them, because if the batteries go dead, everyone drowns. So there's a certain amount of pressure there. So David says to the navigator, yeah, we'll do that, 2/3 ahead. So the navigator said to the helmsman, who had his back to everyone in the control room, 2/3 ahead, Helm. And aye, aye. So now they didn't, you didn't feel any particular change in speed, but I suppose, it was only battery power. You're not expecting Grand Prix results. But David Marquet he was a good judge of character, and he looked around the periscope and he thought the body language of the helmsman wasn't particularly good. So he said, "Everything all right, helmsman?" "Oh, thank you for asking, sir. Everything is fine, sir. Perfect, sir. But, sir, I have to tell you one thing. There is no two-thirds ahead setting on this submarine. It's a third or full ahead, but there's no two-third." So that put David back a bit. It wasn't his fault. Every submarine he was ever on, there was a two-thirds ahead, but the newer generation, just one-third ahead and full ahead. So he bid his time, but he had to ask the obvious question. He said to the navigator, "You knew this, Nav?" "I did, sir, I knew that." "So could you tell me, if you knew that, why you just ordered the helmsman to go two-thirds ahead, when you knew there was no such setting on this vessel?" The navigator calmly said, "Because you ordered me to, sir. Those were my orders." So now David had a problem, and eventually they got the nuclear reactor up and running, and the turbines started spinning, and the ship went back to normal. David called his officers in, and he said, "We have a problem here. I know nothing about this ship. I haven't the luxury. I had 12 months to study the Olympia. I haven't 12 months to study this yoke. And the officers and the crew are following orders blindly. No matter how daft they are, they're just following them blindly. So this is not good, and it's going to end badly. And let me remind you, this is peacetime, and this submarine is supposed to be battle ready. God help us if we ever are in a battle with this regime." So they talked for a good while, and they came up with a few solutions. And they decided, yes, everyone would have to take more responsibility. One of the things they did, which was very interesting, was that the usual request on a ship is permission to do this, sir, permission to do that, permission to submerge, sir, that kind of thing. But they decided, and all agreed, that in future they would say, "I intend to. I intend to, sir. I intend to submerge, sir. I intend to take on supplies, sir. I intend to do this. I intend to do that." That made a huge change, because that meant that whoever said "I intend to," well, you better mean it. I mean, if you say you intend to submerge, you better be sure that all the hatches are closed. Submerging with a hatch open is not very good with a submarine. Not the way to go. Now, if you asked the captain for permission to submerge and a hatch was left open, and he said, "Go ahead," well, that was on his shoulders. But when you say, "I intend to submerge," you better have all your ducks in a row before you let that baby down where she belongs. And the same for every other instruction on the ship. The other word they outlawed was the word "they," as in they were tied up in port somewhere, and the captain said, "Are we ready to go to sea tomorrow?" And the engineer said no. What he wanted to say, but he had to stop himself, was they ordered the wrong part. But in this new regime, he couldn't say that. We got the wrong part. We ordered the wrong part. So maybe there are similarities with a hurling team. If you say you intend to do something, you better be ready to do it. No matter what position you play in, if you intend to do it, that's your responsibility. And if your opposition opens up the defence and scores a goal, you cannot say they defended badly, they let in a goal. We let in a goal. No matter what mistake is made, everyone has to take responsibility for it. That was David Marquet's baptism of fire, but it has a happy ending because when that new regime got up and running, the Santa Fe was inspected as usual. A few guys came from Navy headquarters and stayed for a few days and with their flip charts and marked the boys on their performance. And the Santa Fe went from worst to first. It became the best performing team, the best performing group of sailors since records began in the United States Navy. These were just the same men, all men at that time, but under a different leadership regime, which happened a bit by accident, in all fairness. But they did infuse a regime where people took responsibility, where the blame game was outlawed, and where everyone became a leader. So, not so different from Sligo Senior Hurling team.